Hello, hello, welcome back to Paid to Know. Oh wow, that actually rhymed. Okay, I'm your host Rika Raga, and today I want to talk about something that every creative, strategist, freelancer, consultant, agency owner, and service provider will eventually experience if they stay in business long enough. The client feedback, and not the cute kind of feedback. Not the, oh my gosh, I love it, no changes kind of feedback. I mean the kind of feedback that makes your stomach drop a little. The kind that makes you reread the message 3 times. The kind that makes you suddenly question your talent, your pricing, your process, your contract, your entire existence, and maybe even your decision to start a business in the first place. Because nobody really prepares you for that part. People talk about getting clients. People talk about sending proposals. People talk about closing deals, building portfolios, making money online, and getting paid to do what you love. But not enough people talk about what happens after the money comes in and now you actually have to manage the relationship. The expectations, the revisions, the emotions, the opinions, the unclear feedback, the sudden change of direction, and the client who approved something last week but somehow hates it today. And honestly, that part will mature you faster than any design course, marketing course, business book, or motivational podcast ever will. Because when you work with people, you are not just managing deliverables, you are managing interpretation. You are managing fear. You are managing trust. You are managing the gap between what someone said they wanted, what they actually meant, what they imagined in their head, what you created based on the information they gave you, and what they suddenly feel when they see it in front of them. That gap is where most client problems live. And I know this because I've been doing this for years. I started as a designer. I built websites, I created brands, I worked with so many types of clients. From small business owners to US-based companies to local Philippine businesses to brands that had no structure, no proper backend, no business systems, no follow-up, no real conversion system, but somehow expected the logo, the website, or the content to fix everything. For a long time, I thought negative feedback meant I failed. If a client didn't immediately love something, I took it personally. If they asked for revisions, I wondered if I wasn't good enough. If they questioned the direction, I felt like I had to defend myself. If they didn't understand the strategy, I assumed maybe I didn't explain it well enough. Which, to be fair, sometimes was true, but over time, I learned something that changed the way I handle feedback. The client is not always right, but the client is always telling you something. Sometimes they are telling you they don't understand the strategy. Sometimes they are telling you they are scared. Sometimes they are telling you they don't trust the process yet. Sometimes they are telling you they are not the real decision maker. Sometimes they are telling you they are comparing your work to something completely unrelated. Sometimes they are telling you they actually do not know what they want. And sometimes, yes, they are telling you that something in the work needs to be improved. But all feedback is information. It is not always instruction. And that distinction is everything. Because if you treat every piece of client feedback as an instruction, you will become a pixel pusher, a Canva assistant, a yes person, a waiter taking orders. Move this here. Make this bigger. Can we try this color? Can we make it pop? Can we add more personality? Can we make it premium but also fun but also minimalist but also colorful but also clean but also loud? And if you say yes to every single thing without understanding what is really underneath the request, you will destroy the work trying to please the client. That is one of the hardest lessons I had to learn. Because in the beginning, when a client gave me feedback, my instinct was to fix it immediately. I wanted to be fast. I wanted to be easy to work with. I wanted to be liked. I wanted them to feel like, wow, Rika is so accommodating. So I would revise. But then I realized that being accommodating without leadership is not service. It is surrender. And that is not what clients are paying us for. They are not paying us to panic with them. they are paying us to lead them through the discomfort of building something that actually works. So now, when I receive feedback, I don't immediately ask, how do I change this? I ask, what is this feedback really saying? Because sometimes when a client says, I don't like this color, what they actually mean is, I don't understand why this color belongs to my brand. Sometimes when they say, can we make this more premium? What they mean is, I'm afraid my audience won't take me seriously. Sometimes when they say, can we add more details? What they mean is, I feel like this is too simple for the amount I paid. Sometimes when they say, I showed it to my husband, my cousin, my staff, my friend, my neighbor, and they said, what they mean is, I do not fully trust my own decision yet. So I outsourced my confidence to people who were never part of the strategy. And that is where your job begins. Not in blindly obeying the feedback, but in translating it. One of the biggest mistakes creatives and service providers make is assuming the client sees the work the same way we see the work. They don't. You see the strategy, they see the surface, you see the positioning, they see the color, you see the conversion path, they see the button, you see the buyer psychology. They see the caption, you see the system, they see the post, and this goes beyond design. Sometimes the thing the client is reacting to is not the whole strategy. It is just one touch point inside it. They might not understand the hook right away because the hook is not always sitting on the graphic. Sometimes it is in the caption. Sometimes it is in the first email. Sometimes it lands on the third message of the sequence. Sometimes the WhatsApp or text blast is short on purpose because it is meant to feel direct, easy, and human, not like a full sales page squeezed into a text. So when clients give feedback on one piece, I have to ask, are they reacting to the work itself? Or are they only seeing one part of the journey without understanding the full strategy prepared for them? Because real marketing is rarely one post doing all the work. It is the movement between the post, the caption, the email, the follow-up, the reminder, and the next touch point that slowly brings someone closer to action. This is why explanation is not optional. When I present work now, I don't just show the output, I explain the thinking. I explain why something is there. I explain what problem it solves. I explain what behavior it is designed to create. Because if you don't explain your work, the client will judge it based on taste, and taste is unstable. Taste changes depending on mood, insecurity, comparison, trend, ego, and who happened to be sitting beside them when they opened the file. Strategy gives the work a spine. So before you get offended by feedback, ask yourself, did I actually explain the decision behind the work? Or did I just send the work and hope they would understand? Because hope is not a presentation strategy. I've had clients come to me thinking they had a content problem when really, they had a structure problem. They were posting but nothing was converting. They were running ads but there was no backend. They had leads coming in but nobody was nurturing them. They had offers everywhere but no clear hero offer. They had a beautiful brand but no system that could hold attention long enough to turn it into revenue. So when I tell a client, we need to fix the backend before we pour more money into traffic, that is not just an opinion. That is a strategic decision. But if I don't explain that properly, the client might hear, oh, she just doesn't want to run ads. No, I don't want you to waste money. There is a difference. A lot of negative feedback is not actually negative feedback. It is confusion wearing a costume. The client is confused, so they criticize. They don't understand, so they resist. They feel uncertain, so they ask for more options. They don't feel safe, so they micromanage. And that is not always because they are difficult. Sometimes it is because the process was not clear enough. Sometimes it is because the expectations were not set early enough. Sometimes it is because we assumed they knew how creative work works. But most clients do not know how creative work works. They don't know that the first direction is not always the final direction. They don't know that refinement is part of the process. They don't know that a small change can completely shift the perception of a design. They don't know that make it premium is not a clear instruction. They don't know that asking 10 people for opinions will usually create more confusion, not clarity. They don't know that more options can actually make decision making worse. And because they don't know, you have to guide them. This is why your process has to educate the client while protecting you. I want to say that again because this is one of the most important things I wish more creatives, strategists, and service providers understood. Your process has to educate the client while protecting you. It should educate the client on how to give feedback, how to make decisions, how to evaluate the work, and how to understand what stage of the strategy they are looking at. But it should also protect you from over-explaining forever, revising forever, chasing approval forever, and turning every project into an emotional obstacle course. A good process does not just organize the project. It protects the relationship. It tells the client what to expect before emotions enter the room. It tells them how many rounds of revisions are included. It tells them when feedback is due. It tells them who needs to approve. It tells them what kind of feedback is useful. It tells them what happens when the direction changes. It tells them that strategy comes before preference. And most importantly, it tells them that your role is not to be controlled, but to lead. Because here is the truth. If you do not define the process, the client's anxiety will define it for you. And anxious clients create chaotic projects. Not always because they are bad people. Sometimes because they are investing money, they care about their business, they are scared to make the wrong decision, and they don't know how to evaluate the work. So your job is not just to create. Your job is to hold the room. You have to hold the room when the client is unsure, when they suddenly want to change direction, when they say, I don't know, something feels off, when they send vague feedback, when they bring in outside opinions, and when they confuse their personal preference with their market's behavior. Because that is what you are paid to know. You're not just paid to make things pretty. You're paid to understand why people buy, why people hesitate, why brands become memorable, why systems convert, why offers need hierarchy, why clarity beats cleverness, why best known often beats best, and why a business cannot scale if every decision is based on the founder's mood that day. This is why I always say, the client's opinion matters, but it is not the strategy. The market is the strategy. The business goal is the strategy. The positioning is the strategy. The buyer journey is the strategy. The data is the strategy. The client's personal taste is information. It is not the boss. And I know that might sound harsh, especially if you are used to being a people pleaser, but I wish someone told me this earlier. You can care deeply about your client without letting their panic run the project. Those are two different things. You can listen without obeying everything. You can be kind without being weak. You can be collaborative without giving up your authority. You can take feedback seriously without taking it personally. And this is where maturity comes in. Because when you are new, every correction feels like rejection. When you are new, feedback feels like proof that you are not good enough. When you are new, you think confidence means the client never questions you. But when you mature, you realize confidence is not avoiding feedback. Confidence is being able to sit with feedback, interpret it, and respond without collapsing. That is the work. Not just becoming better at design, not just becoming better at marketing, not just becoming better at strategy. Becoming better at not abandoning yourself the moment someone is not immediately pleased. Because some clients will not understand the work at first. Some clients need time. Some clients need explanation. Some clients need reassurance. Some clients need a call instead of a long email. Some clients need to be reminded of the original goal. Some clients need to be shown the difference between what they personally like and what their audience needs. And some clients need boundaries. That last one is important. Because yes, sometimes feedback makes the work better. Sometimes the client notices something you missed. Sometimes they have insight about their audience, their operations, their customers, their team, or their industry that you genuinely need to consider. We should never be so arrogant that we think every client concern is wrong. But sometimes feedback is not improving the work anymore. Sometimes it is just fear moving furniture around. Sometimes it is indecision pretending to be refinement. Sometimes it is a client trying to get 5 projects out of one scope. Sometimes it is someone who hired you for expertise but only feels safe when they are controlling every detail. And that is where you have to know when to stop. Because unlimited revisions do not create better work. They create resentment. They weaken the strategy. They exhaust the creative. They train the client to believe that clarity is optional because they can always change their mind later. And if you are not careful, you will become the shock absorber for someone else's lack of decision making. That is not sustainable. Sometimes ending a project is more professional than dragging it until both sides hate each other. Not every client relationship is meant to be saved. Some clients are not ready to be led. Some clients say they want strategy, but really they only want validation. Some clients say they want expertise but punish you when your expertise challenges them. Some clients say they want premium work but treat the project like a guessing game. And sometimes they are not bad people. They are just not a fit for your process. That is an important distinction. A bad fit does not always mean you are bad at what you do. Sometimes it means your standards are finally becoming visible. This is why contracts matter. Scope matters. Revision limits matter. Approval points matter. Feedback deadlines matter. Decision makers matter. I know contracts are not sexy. I know boundaries do not feel as exciting as closing the sale, but the way you protect the project after the invoice is paid is what determines whether your business is actually mature. Because a lot of people know how to sell. Not everyone knows how to deliver without losing themselves, and that is a whole different skill. For me, one of the biggest shifts happened when I stopped seeing feedback as a personal attack and started seeing it as part of the diagnostic process. Now, when a client says something feels off, I don't immediately spiral. I ask better questions. What feels off? Does it feel too serious or too playful? Too premium or too casual? Too safe or too loud? Too generic or too specific? Too complicated or too simple? Is the issue the message, the layout, the offer, the image, the tone, the structure, or the expectation behind it? Because I don't like it is not the final answer. It is the beginning of the conversation. And sometimes, when you ask the right question, you find out the problem is very small. The client thought the whole brand direction was wrong, but actually the font just felt too soft. They thought the website did not feel premium, but actually the spacing was too tight. They thought the offer was confusing, but actually there were too many choices. They thought the content was not working, but actually there was no call to action. They thought marketing failed, but actually the lead follow-up was broken. That is why you cannot react too quickly. You have to diagnose before you revise. Because if you revise without diagnosing, you are just decorating confusion. And oh dear, confusion is expensive. It costs time. It costs trust. It costs energy. It costs margin. It costs momentum. And in a small business, especially in a service business, confusion can quietly eat your profit. This is one of the reasons why I believe structure is not just an operations thing. Structure is emotional protection. A clear process protects you from overgiving. A clear scope protects you from resentment. A clear strategy protects the work from random opinions. A clear presentation protects the client from misunderstanding. A clear contract protects both sides when the project becomes uncomfortable. And a clear boundary protects the business from turning into a people-pleasing machine. Because if your business depends on everyone liking you all the time, you will not survive. I say that with love. You cannot build a real business if you are terrified of disappointing people. You cannot lead clients if your nervous system treats every revision like danger. You cannot charge premium prices if you are afraid to say, "That is outside the scope." You cannot be paid for your expertise if you keep abandoning your expertise to make people comfortable. And you cannot become known for your work if your work keeps getting diluted by every random opinion in the room. At some point, you have to decide, am I here to be liked or am I here to lead? And yes, ideally, we want both. We want clients to enjoy working with us. We want the relationship to feel good. We want the process to feel collaborative. We want them to feel heard. But being liked cannot be the highest goal. The highest goal is to do the work well. And sometimes doing the work well requires correction. Sometimes it requires saying, I understand why you are asking for that, but I would not recommend it because it weakens the positioning. Sometimes it requires saying, that feedback is helpful, but before we change direction, let's go back to the original goal. Sometimes it requires saying, we can explore that, but it will affect the timeline and scope. Sometimes it requires saying, the issue may not be the design. The issue may be that the offer is not clear. Sometimes it requires saying, I know you personally like this, but I don't think your market will respond to it. That is not arrogance. That is responsibility. Because not every client relationship is difficult because you failed. Sometimes the standards are finally becoming visible. When I was younger in business, I wanted to be flexible for everyone. I wanted to adjust to every client's style. I wanted to be the designer, the strategist, the therapist, the emergency responder, the magician, the mind reader, the operations manager, the brand police, the sales team, the content person, the website person, the automation person, the emotional support person. And then I wondered why I was tired. Now I understand that flexibility without structure is how you become underpaid and overused. So my process became stronger, my language became clearer, my proposals became more specific, my positioning became sharper, my boundaries became less apologetic, and my work became better because I stopped letting every project become a custom emotional obstacle course. This is also why I talk so much about standardizing your genius, because if your process only lives inside your head, every client will experience a different version of you. Some will get the confident version, some will get the tired version, some will get the over-explaining version, some will get the rushed version, some will get the people-pleasing version. Some will get the version of you that forgot to set boundaries because you were excited to close the deal. That is dangerous. Your process has to protect the best version of your work from the worst version of your energy. Because you will not always feel confident. You will not always feel patient. You will not always feel inspired. You will not always feel like explaining for the 10th time why the strategy matters. But if your process is strong, it carries you. It gives you the words. It gives you the structure. It gives you the next step. It gives the client something to trust besides your personality. That is how you move from being a creative who performs for approval to being a strategist who leads outcomes. And I think that is the real lesson of client feedback. It is not just about how to handle criticism. It is about whether your business has enough structure to hold discomfort. Because feedback is discomfort. Revisions are discomfort. Misalignment is discomfort. A client not liking something is discomfort. A client questioning your direction is discomfort. And if your business has no container for discomfort, every uncomfortable moment becomes chaos. But if you have a process, it becomes a conversation. If you have boundaries, it becomes a decision. If you have strategy, it becomes a diagnosis. If you have confidence, it becomes data. And if you have maturity, it does not become your identity. That is the part I want you to hear. A client's feedback is not your identity. A revision is not your worth. A difficult project is not your entire career. One unclear message is not proof that you are failing. One client who does not understand your work is not the market deciding you are not good enough. You need to learn from it, yes. You need to improve your process, yes. You need to take responsibility where responsibility belongs, yes. But you do not need to emotionally bleed every time someone has an opinion. Because the more visible you become, the more opinions you will receive. The more expensive your work becomes, the more fear clients will bring into the room. The bigger the businesses you work with, the more stakeholders there will be. The more strategic your work becomes, the more you will challenge people's assumptions. And the more you lead, the more you will have to disappoint the version of the client that wants comfort over clarity. That is part of the job. So here is my practical advice if you are dealing with client feedback right now. Do not reply while emotional. Read it, walk away. Come back as the strategist, not as the wounded artist. Then separate the emotion from the information. What are they actually saying? What is unclear? What needs to be clarified? What needs to be defended? What needs to be changed? What needs to be brought back to the original goal? Then respond with leadership, not defensiveness, not apology addiction, not passive-aggressive politeness, leadership. Something like, "Thank you for this feedback. Before I revise, I want to clarify what specifically feels off so we can make the next round more accurate." Or like, "I understand the concern. I want to bring us back to the goal we agreed on at the start of the project because this direction was created to support that outcome." Or, "We can explore that change, but I want to flag that it may shift the positioning from premium to more casual." Or, "That request is outside the current scope, but I can quote it separately if you want to add it." Do you see the difference? You are not fighting the client. You are holding the strategy. And that is a skill. That is a business skill. That is a leadership skill. That is what separates someone who is simply hired for hands from someone who is paid for judgment. Because at the end of the day, being paid to know means you are not only paid to create. You are paid to interpret. You are paid to guide. You are paid to know when feedback is valid, when feedback is fear, when feedback is confusion, when feedback is a scope issue, when feedback is a process issue, and when feedback is a sign that the client is not ready for the level of work they asked for. So no, the client is not always right, but the client is always telling you something. Your job is to listen deeply enough to understand what they are really saying, and lead strongly enough not to let the work collapse under the weight of everyone's feelings. That is how you protect the work. That is how you protect the relationship. That is how you protect your business. And honestly, that is how you protect yourself. Because the goal is not to become a service provider who never receives negative feedback. That person does not exist. Even Mount Fuji gets 1-star review. The goal is to become someone who can receive feedback without losing your center. Someone who can explain the work. Someone who can improve the work. Someone who can challenge the client. Someone who can set the boundary. Someone who can say, "I hear you, but here is what I recommend." That is authority. Not being loud, not being intimidating, not pretending you know everything. Authority is being able to stay grounded when other people are unsure. And that is what makes people trust you. So if you're in a season where client feedback feels heavy, where you are questioning yourself, where you are wondering if you are too sensitive for this work, I want you to know you are not too sensitive. You may just need a better process. You may need clearer expectations. You may need stronger contracts. You may need better presentation language. You may need to stop treating every client comment as a command. You may need to stop accepting projects where the client wants your hands but not your leadership. And maybe you need to remember that you are allowed to be kind and still be firm. Your process has to educate the client while protecting you. Your process has to protect the best version of your work from the worst version of your energy. And your identity has to be stronger than one piece of feedback. That's it for today's episode of Paid to Know. Today was about client feedback, but really it was about leadership. It was about learning how to listen without collapsing, explain without over-apologizing, revise without losing the strategy, and set boundaries without feeling guilty. Because a client's feedback is not your identity, it is information. And when you know how to use it without surrendering your authority, that is when you stop performing for approval and start leading the work. You can find me on Instagram at Ricaraga. And if you want more of my unfiltered business thoughts, my book, Lessons from the People Who Paid Me and the Ones Who Didn't, is available on ricaraga.com for the Philippines, Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, and bookstores around the world. I'll see you in the next episode. I'm Rika Raga, and this is Paid to Know.